Well, hello everybody and welcome to a brand new look of an Unpacked Lunch. I say it's a brand new look. It's kind of the same look that we get on Sunday, but we thought that this would liven it up a little bit. So welcome, really glad that you're watching. If you're watching, please do put your name in the comments. We always say this, put your names in the comments. Let us know what you're having for lunch is always the question you've got. And any questions that you've got around faith, any questions that you've got specifically around the series that we're in at the Forge at the moment called Curious, but not necessarily, we would love to hear from you. And we will look to address those and answer them next week in next week's Unpacked Lunch. And so you can give us a week to mull them over as well. I'm here with Steve, our senior leader. Just need to do all of that sort of thing. And Steve, we are, brand new look, looking a little bit different.
And can I just congratulate you on facing the weather and driving all the way here safely, because obviously last week it was just a little bit slippery, wasn't it? Yeah. So we needed to cancel last week. So I just want to congratulate your bravery, Jonny.
Thank you. I feel like it needs to be thanked.
Yeah.
Just want to say hello to Brenda, who's inevitably already logged on. This is pre-recorded, but Brenda, we know that you are already watching, and we appreciate it, genuinely. So Steve, on Sunday, we're in this series called Curious, and if you don't know, although if you're watching this, chances are you are, and you can catch up if you haven't, but don't worry, you'll still be able to understand everything as always. We're in this series called Curious, which effectively is allowing us to explore faith a little bit, explore some of the fundamentals. So whether you call yourself a Jesus follower and you've been part of a church for a while and you kind of get the fundamentals, this is a great reminder for you and a great invitational tool for those perhaps you'd like to introduce to faith a little bit. Or maybe you are someone who's curious and you've been kind of following along with this series with some questions, and we're really glad that you've been watching. But Leon Evans, who's our friend from Helzoin, has been part of this series, giving us a little bit of background into faith and the rest of it. And on Sunday, he kind of brought us into this idea of the type of God that we believe in, the type of God that we follow. And so, Steve, as part of that, he kind of talked about certain gods that maybe we often follow, but don't actually really exist. And so you're going to expand on that a little bit today.
Yeah, sure. Yes. So basically, last week in our Unpacked Lunch, we picked up on, does God exist? And you brilliantly went through some of the evidence for that. And then it's the case of, well, if he does, then what's he like? And so really, that's what this second part of Curious has been about. And I think lots of us grow up either with school or with Sunday school, and we are given a picture of what God is like. And it's very black and white. It's very simple. So I grew up going to Sunday school because I grew up in a Christian family, a church-going family. And, that God was the one who answered our prayers. God was the one who would protect us. God is the... And it was absolutely right for a child. The issue comes is that as we grow up, we've got to have nuances to our understanding of what God is like. Otherwise, we will come to the conclusion that God is not real, and that God is just horrible because he doesn't do what we think he should then therefore do. So I think that over time, people have different images of what God is like. And so one of them would be what would be termed as the bodyguard God. The bodyguard is the one who protects someone from facing harm. If you've seen the movie The Bodyguard back in the 90s with Kevin Costner and what's her name? What's the singer? You don't even know, do you? Whitney Houston, that's right.
I know the one with Ryan Reynolds in it. That's the new one. And
right.
Samuel L. Jackson. It's a cracking film.
The bodyguard is there to protect, yes? And so it's really easy because the Bible does speak about God protecting us. And so therefore, God should protect us, therefore, from anything bad happening, because that's what God is like. And the problem with that is that he doesn't. That he does sometimes, and sometimes we're just not aware of it. But more often than not, we just experience things in life, and we expect God to stop anything bad from happening. And when it does, we then start to question God and say, well, what's God really like then? Because if I was God, I wouldn't let that happen to me. And it just causes all kinds of confusion. And I suppose in a sense, we have to put the bodyguard God to death. We have to let go of that, because even looking at Jesus, and what happened to Jesus? You know, Jesus was threatened with stoning. Jesus was really mocked and hated by people, and ultimately he was crucified. And so if God is the bodyguard God who always steps in to help us so that we don't have to face hard times, he didn't even do that for Jesus. So we've got a wrong understanding of what God is like. Now, does God protect? Yeah, I believe he does. Is God big and powerful? Absolutely. But is he the bodyguard God to prevent anything bad from happening? No, he's not. And if you hold on to that, please let go of it. Let go of it, because that is not the picture that God that is given through the Bible. That's not the image of God.
Mm. Hey, so Leon talks about that a little bit, and he talks around how ultimately that God can't exist because of free will, and so he talks a little bit like either God is just dismissive of it and doesn't care about it, or he's actually an evil God. But actually, he kind of used that phrase like lovesick father, which I thought was brilliant as well.
That's right. I think whenever all of us will face bad things, we just do. That's part of life. We're not shielded. We're not hedged from experiencing tough things in life. But emotionally, we don't like that. And so that's where our emotions kind of take over and say, well, if God doesn't intervene, either that he's an absent God, or he's an apathetic God, or he's a God who just doesn't care. He's an angry God. It might be he's punishing us. And so that's where we run to if we think and believe in a bodyguard God, and then something bad happens to us.
Hey, that's helpful. That's really helpful. And so we've got the bodyguard God.
Yep.
Bodyguard God doesn't exist.
Yep.
Is there any other gods?
Yeah, there are lots. There are lots, and ones which we create. And so there's like an on-demand God. You know, we have on-demand TV now. In fact, you know, you can watch this on demand. You haven't got to watch it live anymore. And it's like whenever I want something, I'm able to watch it. And in a sense, I think often we can view God in a very similar way, that God's an on-demand God. When I need him, when I pray a really sincere prayer, which is not about me necessarily, it might be about something else, then God will listen and God will answer, because that's what I would do if I was God. And in a sense, it's a very similar kind of representation as the bodyguard God. The Netflix God says, come on demand, God, you need to be able to do this. And of course, when he doesn't, where does that leave us? Just as the bodyguard God didn't exist for Jesus because Jesus had to face crucifixion, so the Netflix or the on-demand God didn't work for Jesus either, because he said, look, if you can, take this cup from me. You know, he was there in the garden and he called out to God because he naturally, humanly, he didn't want to go through what he was going to have to go through. And so the on-demand God didn't turn up and say, okay, yeah, I'll make it easy for you now. I'll take that away. He didn't. And so we have to learn that of course we should talk to God. We should bring all of our requests to him. And sometimes God answers in the way that we want, and sometimes he doesn't. And our faith in God needs to incorporate the bigness of actually God sometimes sees a bigger picture than we do. So he's just not this on-demand God. And if that's, again, how we view God, we need to let go of that view, because God is bigger than just being an on-demand God.
It was something that you said in terms of just in starting that, when there were a whole bunch of different gods and gods that we create. Yeah. I can't remember who said it. I think it was possibly Einstein, but that could just be completely made up. But I heard it from Heather Zempel, who said, in the beginning, God created us in his image, and ever since we've been returning the favor.
Yes,
and I kind of feel like, with the Netflix God, it's like, hey, we want a God who just on demand, shows up. And so that's what we're going to create, and that's what we're going to follow. But it doesn't mean it exists.
No,
so
that's right. I think there is also, we can view God very emotionally as well. And emotions are good. Of course they are. They're very much part of who we are. But we shouldn't make all of our judgments based on our emotions. And so a kind of another understanding of God would be like the boyfriend God that feels really close. And it's like when you fall in love with a girl or a boy or whatever. And there is just that that closeness, that it feels good. And it's really easy, especially when people first come to faith. God can feel very close to them. And we expect, therefore, that if we don't feel God's presence, he's not present. Mm. And that's just not true. Mm-hmm. That's just not true. We can't rely on our feelings when it comes to God. We have to rely on truths and promises. That's what we, in a sense, have to build our faith upon, what God promises us. And God promises that he will never leave us. He will never forsake us. And so, just in going through this and thinking about this, I was thinking that, bad things shouldn't happen to good people. And yet my first wife, Sarah, died of cancer. The on-demand God, I felt that it was purely selfless to be praying for her healing, and God didn't heal her. And then it comes to God always feeling close. After she died, I had no idea where God was for me. There was just this period of time where, I really didn't. But I didn't give up on God through that time, because I knew that it wasn't just about what I felt and my feelings. It was still down to the truth that God says, Steve, I am with you always to the very end of the age. And so I have to let go of, if God feels close, then I know that he's real, and if he doesn't, I have to let go of that one, because God is true to his word. So, let go of the boyfriend or the girlfriend God, the one that just feels nice.
Great. So just as a recap, then we've got the bodyguard God, we've got the Netflix God, we've got the boyfriend or girlfriend God. It kind of feels like that we take true aspects of God and warp them.
That's right.
So it's like we have the bodyguard God, and so God protects, but he doesn't protect us from, or he doesn't stop us from, experiencing bad things. No. He answers prayer, but he doesn't answer prayer on demand. Yeah. And he's present and he's with us, and we can tangibly feel that sometimes, but it's not that he's not there when we don't feel, it's not there all the time. So, so those are three. Are there any, give us some more?
Sure. Then I think some people have this view of God being a kind of a guilt God. Certainly, I grew up being taught that I was a sinner, and that that I needed God, and that's true. I am. I don't think that's the best starting point. I think the best starting point is we're made in God's image, and so therefore we reflect God's likeness, but it's been distorted by sin. But I have met so many people when something bad happens, they just say, well, God's punishing me, or they say, what have I done wrong? And they ask those questions because they think that God is looking down, and he uses guilt and he uses fear to kind of get us to do what he wants. And that is so far from what the Bible speaks about, what God is like. And what I've come to experience too, that God isn't this God that's just waiting for us to make a mistake so that he can punish us. And that if anything bad happens to us, that's not necessarily God's punishment. I was watching a program last night. I think it's on BBC, but it's on iPlayer, and it's just called The 80s. And it covers music, news, the presidency in America. It's an American-based one. And the episode that I watched yesterday was the AIDS epidemic, which came in the late 70s, early 80s, and people didn't know. And of course, then they showed it on TV. The preachers that were saying this is God's judgment on homosexuals and stuff like that. And now just everything within me just cringes, because that's the guilt God saying, if you step out of line, then you're in trouble. And so there's this threat that we have to obey. And that's not how God operates. God woos us. He loves us, and he calls us to be faithful to him, not out of a threat or fear. But I think a lot of people, so I've had lots of conversations with people when they've faced difficulties or they've hit an illness, and they say that, this is God punishing me for something that I've done. No, I don't. But I believe that God disciplines, but not with cancer and AIDS and the things. Do you know what I mean? I think that so much of the things that go wrong in our lives is not God causing it. It's actually the cause and effect. We can trace it back to decisions that we or others have made that have caused those difficulties in life. So, the guilt God, let go of it quickly, because I think it's a very damaging one as well.
So again, so like with the others, when there was almost the element of truth within them that can be warped and distorted, with the guilt God, what do you think the truth is within that we think perhaps we've warped and we've distorted?
Yeah, I think I believe that God hates sin because sin destroys that which is good. And so he wants to protect us from that. And it's sin that prevents us from having a relationship with God. It gets in the way. It's that barrier that stops. Just as if I, offend or hurt or say something against Sarah, that will cause a barrier between us, and it requires forgiveness for the relationship to be restored. And so, the Christian faith is about the saving power of Jesus, of him coming to die for us. So of course, I understand that sin needs to be dealt with, and God has made that way possible through Jesus. I just don't think that he holds it as this threat over our lives. He wants us to be free, not to be threatened. And it's in freedom that he wants us to live. So sin prevents us from living free. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Almost using some of the language from the last series, maybe in a slightly different context, it almost feels like guilt is the thing that reveals to us our direction rather than the place that God wants us to live in.
That's
so,
right. Absolutely.
So that's great. So far we've had 4 gods. So there's the bodyguard God, there's the boyfriend, girlfriend God, there's the Netflix on-demand God, and then there's the guilt God.
Yeah, very good.
There we go. It's always a risk, isn't it? So those are all things that God isn't like. And maybe you're watching along at home and you've probably got, maybe you fall into one of those camps, and let us know if you ever fall into one of those things where you're like, actually, I've got to admit, sometimes I just fall into the on-demand God, or I expect God to do things. Yeah. We all do, right? Or maybe you've got one of your own and you can think of a cool title for it, and let us know around the gods that it's easy to create for ourselves. But we do believe in a God. And so what is God really like?
Yeah, I think Leon picked it up brilliantly in the message on Sunday, that he speaks about God being a lovesick father. And he used the story of the prodigal son, of the son who went away and squandered half of his dad's wealth on reckless living. He comes back, and the surprise in the story is that the dad is looking out for him, and the dad runs towards him and throws his arms around him. And instead of saying, "What have you done, son?" In fact, the son who wants to say, "I'll just be a servant. I don't warrant being your son anymore." Dad throws a party for him, and there is this picture that God is a dad. In fact, Jesus taught it. He said, when you pray, this is what you're to pray. He says, "Our Father." So Jesus wants us to view God as our Heavenly Father, the perfect Heavenly Father, not just a replica of our own dads. And so what's so amazing in that story is that, one, it's the love that he has for the son who was lost. And so no matter where we are in life, or however bad we feel our life has been, that God wants to welcome us. In fact, Nathan's story that we showed on Sunday is evidence of that, of someone whose life was wild, and yet God welcomes him in. And I think also, the other part of it is that God's character is so full of grace. In other words, it's not treating us as we deserve, but he's giving us so much. In that story, Leon didn't go on to it, but he talks about the older brother who hears about a party that's going on, and he asks one of the servants and says, "What's going on here?" And he says, "Oh, your younger brother has come back and Dad's thrown a party." So the brother refuses to go in. I mean, he is furious because, Dad hasn't thrown a party for him. And he challenges his dad over it and says, "How can you be doing this? How can you throw a party for him when you haven't even thrown a party for me, and I've been here all along?" And the dad is just so wise. He says, "Look, everything I've got is yours." He says, "But my son was lost, but now he's found. He was blind, but now he can see." And there is this picture of God's grace not treating us as we deserve. And I love that character, the character of God. That means I can approach him. I shouldn't do it glibly, but I can do it humbly and find that God's arms are always wide open to me, no matter what I've done. And his grace, his forgiveness, his love, his presence then becomes available for all of us. So I think the Bible paints a beautiful picture of who God is, and it's all about a relationship. Yeah, God is there for us to have a relationship with him.
Yeah, that's great. What I think I love around that story is that, and just even thinking as you were saying it, it almost exposes the true elements of the fake gods that you just spoke about, but also the truth behind it as well, and actually why they're fake gods. And so even like the bodyguard god, actually the father in the story wants to protect the son and has its boundaries for it, but actually he doesn't stop the son from walking away unless he wants to. There's the boyfriend god where it's actually there's the presence of the father that's there, but actually it's not the presence of the father that defines the existence of the father. There's the on-demandness of it, whereby the son comes back and he asks for forgiveness, but it's not as if the father's just this on-demand God. He actually invites him back in, and it is a relationship thing rather than a like, give me. And again, even the guilt part, it's like there's the guilt is there to bring him back into the place that he's supposed to be, but at the end of the story, he doesn't stay there. So I just think that's really cool. I think that's really cool. So that the four gods that don't exist: bodyguard God, guilt God, on-demand God, and did I say the boyfriend god? That's right. The boyfriend god. So always one of them. God, absolutely. So yeah, as I said, put in the chat if you fall into one of those, or if you have one of your own. That's going to bring us to an end of today's Unpacked Lunch. Normally at this point, and what we're going to do in future episodes is just have a time where we will answer one of your questions. And so if you have a question around this series or anything around faith, either click on me or Steve's Facebook profile. We'll be commenting on this live, and so you can find us there, and you can direct message us a question or info@forgechurch.com, or put it in the chat, and we'll pick one and we will look to answer it each week, and just give a little bit of time for that. So really want to encourage you to do so. Really grateful that you've been logging on with us today. Really glad that you've been able to join us for this conversation. Join us on Sunday as we carry on with the series Curious. Really want to encourage you to share the stream and to invite others. It's going to be a great series for you for just that, I think. But we'll look forward to seeing you on next week's episode of Unpacked Lunch.